Hi there, it's Carl Irwin, the Common Magician, and I've got something interesting to discuss with you. The question came up is, I'm sure we've talked about this before on the channel. I don't have the time or really the interest to go back through all of the videos I've done over the years to find where I've discussed this specifically, so we'll just talk about it again. And maybe some of the things I say now will differ from what I said the last time we talked about it. I don't know. I'm always changing my mind, just as most people are. But the question is, how to practice, what to practice, and a kind of a third question on there is what resources are worth it, if any resources, because so much is free today, particularly with YouTube and online videos and social media, and even I'll add to that the accessibility to public domain material, stuff that's actually public domain, that is not under any kind of copyright publishing, but is just freely available. There's actually quite a lot of material that is like that for card magic specifically. And I have to say, this is about card magic. Now, I have to throw in the caveat very quickly, as I say frequently on the channel, I'm not a card magician. I do not consider myself to be a card magician in the sense that there are people who work with cards that do magic almost exclusively with cards, or a significant portion of their material is done with cards, and they work on the what is the card literature, the different sleights, the different controls. They're well versed in a vast array of publications, historical publications, and even creating new, new-ish or new takes or nuanced variations on various types of things that can be done with cards. And I'm not that guy. I'm just not that kind of magician. Which actually gets to the first question, which is what to practice. Given that I am what I am, you are what you are, we all are what we are, professionals are what they are, amateurs are what they are, the simple answer to what to practice is you ought to be practicing the stuff you perform. I mean, it's really, really simple. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but it's a true answer. I've talked to many professionals. There are many professionals, very high-ranking professionals, respected professionals, who really do what they do, and they don't dabble outside of what they do. They have a repertoire of material that they stick to, that they perform. They don't really dabble in anything else. They just worry about what they worry about. There's a lot of working professionals who, are grinding it out, and buskers out on the street, people who do street performances or do parties or do corporate events, or different kinds of situations. Wherever you can, do a show professionally, and they really just work on acquiring an illusion that they see that fits into their style and into their situation. They either purchase it or learn it from somebody or develop it themselves, and they work on that, and they work on their repertoire. And in that way, it's really no different than any other kind of skill set. I'm a musician, actually, by profession. I'm a music teacher, but I'm a composer as well. I write a lot of film music, in particular for short films, student films, as kind of a side part of my profession. And I write the way I write. I play the repertoire that I play. There are pieces I have not played. I once spoke to a very famous trumpet player, Bud Herseth. Adolf Herseth is his name. He's gone now. He's passed on away, but he was the principal trumpet player at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra for many years. And you've heard him play if you've ever seen Disney's Fantasia. I think he's on both of those. That's how long he played. He's just one of the top, well-known principal trumpet players in symphony orchestras in the history of orchestra. For trumpet players, they would know that, and orchestra people would know that. I met him one time, and I actually got to take him out to breakfast, and I sat with him for a few hours, and he talked, and I let him talk. I wanted to hear what he had to say, and he divulged to me there is a trumpet sonata that every trumpet player plays. Actually in high school. By high school, you've probably worked on it a little bit or played it for a contest solo, as a contest solo. It's a trumpet concerto, the Hummel trumpet concerto. And he said he'd never played it. He said he had never played that piece. He said he never had a reason. He knew that it was a staple piece of music that everybody has played, but he said he never played it. He never had a reason. This is one of the top people. And, that's not the only piece of music he's never played. Just because something is known as a staple doesn't mean something you have to do. That's just a fact, As a conservatory musician, I would work on a lot of technical skills on my instrument as a trumpet player. But that doesn't mean that a working professional, someone who's out there really grinding it out and making their money off of playing a trumpet in some style of music, doesn't mean that they would ever have to spend time working on the things that I did in a conservatory setting. You just don't have to. It's not necessary. What you do have to do is you have to work on the material that you intend to perform. And that could be as vast as you want it or as finite as you want it. Now, I will make an argument here very quickly about repertoire. If you've ever been to a restaurant where they serve a very large menu, and this is not always true, but it tends to be true. If you go to a place where there's a very vast menu, maybe it's a kind of a chain kind of restaurant, and there's a lot of different diverse items on the list. I'm not talking about like a taco place that has different kinds of tacos. I'm talking about a place that has seafood, then they have a steak, and then they have tacos, and they have Mexican, and they have Italian. They have all kinds of different things, a massive menu. If you compare the food, any particular item from that menu, to a place that has only 10 things on their menu, just 10 items, 9 times out of 10, the place that has a very small menu and only 10 things on the item, the food's going to be better. It's going to be better. And that's because they are focused on that particular menu, and there's less chance and probability that they are inconsistent on the pieces on their menu because it's so finite and well defined. That is the way it is with everything. If you have a very and this doesn't mean that you should only ever work on a small number of tricks ever. It just means that as you're cycling through material that you are actively performing, you should probably consider keeping that fairly boxed in. You can have some material that you have performed in the past that you're just not working on because you're not performing that actively. You should be working on the material that you are performing actively, and you should probably keep that set somewhat narrow. It can change gradually over time, and you perform these things for a while, for weeks and months or whatever, and then you kind of shuffle off a couple things you just don't do as much anymore, and you introduce new stuff. But you want to try to keep your menu relatively narrow. I recommend that. I think that you'll find that is a much less frustrating way to be good at what you're working on. So what do you practice? Practice the stuff, the material that you intend to perform. And that kind of gets to what do you choose to work on? Well, you should work on things and pick tricks, pick illusions, pick presentations that you want to perform, something that you want to do for people. How do you pick that? You should pick something that fits your style, something that fits the kind of magic that suits you. I'm not the kind of guy that's going to go do, gore kind of magic where I'm pushing needles through my arm. It just doesn't fit the people I run with. It doesn't fit my style. It just doesn't work that way. I'm not going to be doing a lot of gambling routines. It's just not something, I have some gambling routines, a few basic things, but that's not something I'm going to spend an enormous amount of time working on because it doesn't suit the people that I'm around. I like to perform pieces that seem very impromptu, use ordinary objects, small objects that are close up. I like to do things that are mentalism and that kind of sit in mentalism and are more cerebral rather than visual. I do some visual tricks, but I have a style. I have a style that suits me and a style that suits the people that I target, which is it's a thing too. Who are you performing for? If you're going to be performing for corporate events, well, you got to have material that suits that kind of audience. If you're going to be doing a children's kind of a magic for camps or for library kind of programs or something like that, well, then your material is going to suit that age group. Not just that age group in particular, but also their parents. It's got to be stuff, and that's something about children's magic that I'm not sure people talk about. But as someone who sees a lot of children's magic because I have kids, if you're picking material for a target audience, make sure you get the whole audience. It's not just the kids that are there, it's their parents too. I've seen a lot of children's magic shows that target only the kids, and the parents are dying, as they're watching it. And I've seen some very good magicians, good acts that are children's acts that are aware that there are parents there, and they target the parents. So as well, it's a bit of a balancing act. So that's how you pick what you do. Now, as far as card magic goes, what card magic do you pick? Well, there's a style there. If you like to do visual card magic, then it's going to require that you work on material and methods that accomplish visual magic. Doesn't have to be difficult card sleights. It might incorporate a lot of gaffs. You might be incorporating a lot of gaffs, and you have to work on a system to ring gaffs in, ring gaffs out. And that could be how you accomplish very visual magic. Deck switches, if you have very specialized decks that have to do very specialized things, you need to have ways and have practice transitions to get from one deck to a completely different one that does something else in order to accomplish very visual magic. If you like to do stuff like I do that's very cerebral, a lot of named card kinds of effects, freely named cards and revelations and controls from freely named selections, then you want to have a repertoire that suits that. Maybe you work from a stack and you need to practice that. You need to find a good stack that works for you. And I highly recommend random, which we'll get to in a minute. What kind of products do you purchase, and are any of them worth it? But I recommend random, which is my ebook that's on memorized and stack deck magic for the common magician. It's not very labor intensive, and that's what it's written for. But you should hone in not on what I say or what someone else says in terms of a list of things, and I will get to a list of things here in a minute that is very generic on purpose. But you should hone in on the things that suit you. Again, I cannot tell you the number of times that I've had side conversations with magicians after watching their act, either buskers on the street or doing street kinds of close-up magic or parlor kinds of effects, or corporate magicians. I've seen only a few of them, or children's magicians. I've seen quite a few of them. Every time I talk to them, I say, what do you work on? They say, well, pretty much the act is what I work on. I really know. I only know what I do, and I don't really spend any time on anything outside of that. I don't have time for that. I need to know what I do very well, and gradually things get introduced and things get taken out, and that's how the act works. So that's how it works. It just is how it works. Even for the conservatory musician and all of the scale material that they work on and all the exercises and etudes, that actually focuses on a style of music. I could do etudes that focus on jazz improvisation, or I could do etudes that focus on classical orchestral music, right? And one doesn't really satisfy the other. You have to kind of pick and choose what your lane is going to be. And you can try to go every lane. If you're going to have some repertoire in every lane, then I suppose that would be something you would have to commit to. But most people don't do that. They kind of pick a lane and they stick in it. And every now and then they might dabble a little bit over here, but that's it. You focus on what you're going to do and what you're going to actually perform for people. And there's a lot of factors that determine what that is. Pay attention to that. Be aware of that. So practice the stuff that you're going to perform. All of that to say that. I got a list here. Now, how do you practice? I strongly recommend that you practice through video recording. It used to be that we would use mirrors, and some people still recommend mirrors. I generally only ever use mirrors for recording when I'm presenting on the channel. I'll have a 3-way set of mirrors, and if I need to show all angles, I'll record for the video. But I very rarely ever record with a mirror. And the reason is because I can record on a cell phone just with video. I can set the cell phone up or a video camera or whatever, something pocket size. We just can record high definition video today, and you couldn't do that as of 15 years ago. It was very difficult to do. But now I can practice with the video camera. I can focus on what I'm doing without looking out there at the mirror, which is not realistic. You generally would be looking at what you're doing or not looking at anything in particular. And I can practice it honestly and then watch it back immediately and see what the honest view is. There is a syndrome that can happen. I've ever heard a couple people mention this on forums. I've never seen it in print. But there is a syndrome that can happen. I've experienced it even before I heard someone mention it. And then I heard someone talk about this and I thought, yes, I know exactly what they mean. Where you're looking at a mirror, you're practicing in a mirror, and you fool yourself in the mirror, but it's kind of a wishful thinking sort of fooling, right? You're doing what you're doing. You're trying to focus on what you're doing. Your attention is divided between what you're doing and trying to catch a glimpse of the mirror. And then you convince yourself that everything looked okay. But you actually didn't get a good view in the mirror, an undivided attention kind of view that you needed to prove that you actually had it good. And with video, that solves that. Record it with a video and watch it back. Now, what are the things that you should practice and record and watch back? First of all, you should work on slights, and we'll get to that in a minute, what slights you should do. And again, this is a very nuanced kind of list I'll give. Slights, but this isn't hardly the most important thing. I mean, obviously, whatever you do in terms of trickery needs to be convincing. That's true. But it's really not the biggest issue. I just don't think so. The second thing that you need to do is presentation. I think presentation is far more important than the slights themselves, because the slights are actually dependent on presentation. It's not that you need to spend more time on presentation and less time on slights. All things have to be acceptable, but the presentation does not really depend on the slights nearly as much as the slights depend on the presentation. Obviously, your slights need to be second nature enough that they don't get in the way and they don't step all over your presentation and prevent you from giving good presentation. But having a solid presentation helps the slights in a way that slights don't help the presentation. Okay, so your presentation needs to be good. And then there's kind of in the presentation, what I mean by that is kind of the order of operations. How do you go from here to there to there to there? Has this been mapped out? Are you flowing seamlessly through that track? Have you worked out the scripting of what you're going to be doing? Okay. Now, there's a third thing that I want to divide out from presentation, and that is communication. One thing that you're recording is communication. You need to work on communicating with people in a way that is effective. How do you do that? I've brought this up a few times before. I think it's helpful to record yourself telling a story. It doesn't have to be like an actual story, like you're reading a book kind of story, but one thing you could do is just try to remember something that happened to you and record yourself telling yourself as if you're telling somebody else that account that happened to you in the past. And try to do it in such a way that is convincing and interesting. Okay, so record yourself telling a story, true story, made up story. True story is probably better. That is told in a way that is convincing, believable, and feels extemporaneous, like you're actually telling yourself for the first time and you didn't know anything about it. And interesting. It's captivating. It actually draws you in. Pay attention to that. Do that a few times. It's going to feel silly doing it, but promise me this is a really good exercise. Watch it back and pay close attention to your mannerisms. And the mannerisms that you are portraying, if you're doing it honestly, are the things that you want to replicate when you're doing magic and you're performing, you're doing a presentation. You want to replicate those mannerisms and copy them as if it is part of your vocabulary, because you need to seem extemporaneous and spontaneous every time you perform. I think that's really, really important. Could you do magic like Teller, right? Where you never say anything? Yeah, you could. But even then, your communication better be spot on. Like whatever you're doing better be so concise and clear that you don't need to say anything. And that takes a lot of work. It takes more work than you realize. Could you do the awkward David Blaine thing? Right? Yeah, but that's a very Target kind of approach. And my guess is that whenever we see Blaine in his early, TV specials doing that, we're probably, I'm guessing, probably only getting a few of those actual performances on the recording. You're not seeing most of what he did, because a lot of people probably ran away, screaming, weirded out. There's other kind of novelty styles by which you can go by. But let's just assume you're going to be a normal person and you're going to speak and communicate in a normal way. And if that's you, then you should record yourself telling a story. Now, there's another way that you can go about this, and I strongly recommend that you look at classic television. Classic television. Dick Van Dyke, Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, some of these old I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, some of these old comedy TV shows, that came out of the black and white kind of era. They have a way, Carol Burnett, improvisation. I mean, if you want to look at more contemporary stuff, you can look at Whose Line Is It Anyway, which is an improvisatory comedy show, and look at how they are communicating, the mannerisms that they're using when they're telling something that is completely false. It's a made-up sort of story in a script. Pay attention to the elements that make it real, that make it comfortable, that make it interesting, that make it intriguing. Bob Newhart, I brought this up, I know in one of my books I wrote about it, but Bob Newhart had an act, in part of his stand-up act, where he would do a one-sided telephone conversation. And it was remarkable because it's a comedy act, it's funny. You'd listen to him, he would do this on his TV show, the Bob Newhart show. Oftentimes there would be scenes where he was having a telephone conversation where he would incorporate this skill. But the goal there was to have a one-sided telephone conversation where the audience knows what's being said on the other side. And all he's doing is going, yeah, sure. And then he would interject a line that wouldn't necessarily be expository and tell you what was said, but it would clue you in onto what the conversation is about. Genius material. And it's that kind of vocabulary, I think, that can be very beneficial in communication. I don't know anybody else that's telling anybody about this way of learning to communicate. I've never heard anybody say it. This is my own thinking on this, but I highly recommend it. Okay, so classic television, comedy, sitcoms, check that out. Even some of the newer sitcoms, you can, comedy sitcom television is very useful in this way. But I think the older stuff is of a higher bar and a higher standard in terms of effective communication. Not just in front of video. Don't just record yourself doing this stuff in front of video. Practice for people. Practice for people that you know that if you mess it up, it's okay. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's friends, family. Maybe you only perform for friends and family. For me, I will show things to my kids. I have an older daughter who she's 10 years old and she can tolerate doing stuff, and I can test a few things out on her. My wife, I do that occasionally. A couple of coworkers sometimes I might do that with. And you can just kind of test basic effectiveness with people that are close to you. It's very hard to do the communication bit with them because they know you intimately, those very close friends and family members. So I can't kind of just turn myself on and do like what I would do with students at school. When I'm teaching at school, they're getting something kind of like what you're seeing on this video. But when I'm communicating with my wife and my kids, I'm a little different, right? We all code switch in that way. So that can be a little bit difficult. But in terms of, I think, the presentation and the slight side of it, perform for live people just to make sure things are believable and they work out and the technical issues are ironed out. So I highly recommend that as well. And just perform. Just get out and perform. And if you fail, big deal. I mean, if something doesn't work, it really is no big deal. I highly recommend if something doesn't work, the first thing you should do is say, well, that didn't work. That's how you deal with it. I mean, that is the best way, that I think, in my opinion, rather than trying to find a way to wiggle yourself out. Just admit, that didn't work. Well, let's do something. Let me show you something else and move on to something else. Best way, and you learn from that and you deal with that. Okay. Now let's get down to the list. What should you work on in terms of card magic? Obviously, you need to work on the sleights that you need to work on for your material. That's it. Your material will determine the sleights you need to do. Okay. And it's not even really that simple, because there are some utilities that you can work on that accomplish the same thing as other sleights that could be used for particular tricks you want to do. For example, you might want to work on an ambitious card routine, and you might think, well, I need to work on my double lift. You don't. I do a whole ambitious card routine that doesn't use a single double lift. Okay. There's other moves and other kinds of utility moves that you can use to accomplish the effect of a card going from the middle to the top. Okay, so as long as you have the vocabulary to accomplish the effects you want, work on that. So, don't look at the trick, look at the kind of menu again of utilities that are available to accomplish that. And that kind of gets me into the solution to this question. What do you work on specifically? I think you need to know some forces. You need to know a few forces. And they ought to be forces that are direct, I think, and accessible to you and accessible to who you're working with. If you have, I find that very elaborate forces, topsy-turvy, kinds of things where, you stop here and then you flip the pack over and do this. The thing, if it looks awkward and draws attention, well, it looks awkward and draws attention. That might not be the right thing to do. However, just a simple, if I want to force the Jack of Diamonds, a simple riffle force, go ahead and say stop right there, okay, and take a look at that card. A simple riffle force, if you can do this convincingly enough, that is good enough for one of your maybe 2 or 3 forces that you do, maybe 3 or 4 forces that you do. This is a good example. A riffle force is an excellent example where the sleight, which is hardly anything, is actually improved by the presentation and the communication. And the sleight itself really does nothing for the presentation. Your presentation is really what makes that particular sleight work. And I think that's true of almost every sleight. Okay. So if you're doing this, again, I want to force the Jack of Diamonds, just as an example. If I'm doing this, I'm seen by the spectator. I'm in the open. Would you like to see a card trick? I'm in that kind of stage, right? And now they're looking at cards, thinking card trick. And then I do this, and then I say stop right there, and then I go like this, right? This is bad. However, if you say, would you like to see something? Notice that the question landed after the setup. I'm already in break. Okay, I'm ahead of this. My presentation's following after the setup. Would you like to see something? They say yes. Say great. Say, just go ahead and say stop anytime. I get paid by the hour. Go ahead, somewhere in the middle. Right there? All right, go ahead and take a look at that card. That's I think how you want to present. You want to be direct, you want to be assertive, you want to communicate, you want to be brisk, you want to flow. And that's why communication and presentation are more important than the slide. So forces, have a few forces. There's plenty of forces that are that involve no sleights at all. There's a lot, okay? I am a forever champion of the crisscross force. Okay, now another thing about forces, you should know a few forces because forces serve as revelations on controlled cards. I don't think this is said overtly by a lot of people, but I made a video way back at the beginning of this channel where I talked about forcing outcomes. And I use forces more for revelations than I do for choices. Usually I'll have free selections, and then what I do is I use the force as the revelation. That's a whole different kind of magic than forcing a card that I need for a revelation that's already been predetermined, like a prediction or something like that. So know that. Have a few forces, some good ones, because those forces not only serve to control a predetermined outcome, they actually serve to control a revelation on a free choice. And that's a whole different ball game, different tricks, okay? So you need to have some forces. You should probably know a way or two, a couple different ways to switch cards. How do you switch cards, right? And I think a double lift is a way to switch cards. So if you have a good double lift, that is something that is important. So, four of spades, and then I can put it over here. I've switched it for something else. Okay, so have some kind of way to switch. I don't do double lifts. Honestly, if I was actually going to switch something in the moment, I kind of go for just what I like to do as opposed to what is most logical. If I have a jack of diamonds and I need to switch it, I'll probably just, double bottom deal it or second deal it or something like that. I don't really get too involved. It's a simple matter of knowing that the thing's there, setting it down, having some presentation, and everyone knows where it's at. It's secure. It's with the deck, right? And now I can just simply take out something different. Not making an issue out of it. Again, this is a place where presentation improves the method, improves the sleight, right? I could try to do things such that it's, out in the open and can be burned and whatnot. But honestly, I can say you have a jack of diamonds here. Now, we're going to try something really, really interesting. What we're going to do is we're going to take your card. I did this under the table. I mean, I had the cards here completely out of view for a moment and set another card on the table. You don't really have to have anything be burnable in most cases. But if your presentation is fluid, you can get away with murder. I mean, you just do anything in a trick. Okay, so have some switches. Things that can be done. Honestly seen, but just have fluidity in your ability to switch one card for another. Have a couple of those. I think you need to have some false mixes. For younger people, I think a cyclical cut is good enough. Cut the cards, cut the cards, cut the cards, cut the cards, cut the cards. So you have a bunch of people cut the cards, and you just cycle the deck, and you can correct that with some kind of a key card, a double thick card, a short, a breather, anything like that. But have a way to falsely mix the cards or appear to mix the cards. Again, you can work on very difficult and visual and burnable methods. Or you can just realize that mixing the cards can look very natural and uninteresting, right? So if you're talking and you're just talking and shooting the breeze, you can shuffle the cards in such a way that they actually don't see it, but they hear it and they think it's been done, right? And this goes for a multitude of types of shuffles, right? I could overhand shuffle like this. I can cut the cards. All of this is very, very lame brain stuff, right? I'm not actually mixing the cards. I'm just taking the bottom and tapping the top with it. And I don't even let them see it. I'm not even trying to go, look, from this angle, if you do it from this angle like this, it looks very convincing. It's not like that, right? All I'm doing is I'm shuffling the cards in such a way that it really is not, it's not interesting. It doesn't have to look a particular way. It just has to be convincing, and it's hardly relevant. But I think it's important that you, particularly if you're using stacked decks or mem decks, if you're doing that, you need to have a repertoire of false shuffles. Okay, so have some of those. Simple ones will do. Okay, so we have forces, some way to switch, some false shuffles, false mixes of any kind. Just a few different ones that you can go to demonstrate in off moments at least that you are shuffling the cards. Now, if you have to do shuffling that has to be convincing and visual, well, then you're going to have to learn some of those kinds of shuffles. If you're doing gambling routines and people are looking at you shuffle the cards on the table, and the whole point is that I am shuffling and you can see that I am shuffling, then you need to have burnable skill for that kind of move, right? And you need to work that out, okay? But I don't do magic like that usually. I mean, I do some stuff, but it's just not something I worry too much about. So forces, couple switches, false mixes, false cuts, simple false cuts will do just a simple swing cut, swing cut the top off, set the bottom down, set the top and the bottom. That's my go-to, okay? And removal. The ability to remove a card from the deck when the deck is relatively in play. Now, again, this is something that can be done kind of haphazardly, right? I could do this in such a way that I'm talking, I've got a card of interest or whatever. I'm talking and the cards go out of view and I've removed something. You can get away with that. You really can. Literally the look over there, right? And you do something, you can get away with a lot of that, but I think you need to have some skill in removing a card. My go-to is usually the cop, gambler's cop. So I will get a break on my card way ahead of time, and I will usually just cop it out like this and take it out. But you need to have some way to get a card out of the deck so that you can do effects that may require that. And if you don't do any effects that require that, then it's not a skill you need to have. You just don't need to. The last thing that I think you need to work on are controls. You need to have a few ways to control a card. You can do it in the act of mixing the cards, or you can do it in a burnable sense where it looks like you're doing nothing. In this area, I will recommend the cull, the spread cull. I do recommend that you know how to do a spread cull. With a spread cull, you can eliminate a lot of moves. If you have a decent, and it's not hard to have a good spread cull in spite of what some people say. If you have a good spread call, you can eliminate a lot of moves for a lot of different tricks just by doing that. Because the spread call can work as acquiring a card of interest. It can work also as a force. You can use a spread call for that. In fact, I can do an entire ambitious card routine using only a spread call and nothing else. That is something that you can do. So have some kind of control so that a card can be inserted to the deck. You can get control over it. Now, one, I think, way to deal with control that I'll give you just off the top here that doesn't require really any sleights. There are some moves, but they're not sleights. Crimping. If you can crimp a card, simple corner crimp, just different ways to crimp a selected card, you really essentially cover the issue of control. Because if you've crimped a card, you can hand the deck over, have them shuffle the cards, take the cards back, and all you got to do is find the crimp and cut openly, and you have controlled the card. So you can deal with controls really just with a vocabulary of crimping can do that. And again, I think a simple corner crimp is sufficient. You don't have to know the infinity crimp, the Nash infinity crimp, or different kinds of ways to lay in invisible work or whatever. Any kind of crimp will do. It's something that even magicians don't think about when they're looking at card magic. It's just, for some reason, magicians' minds don't go to that. They think about other methods that are more talked about, but crimping as a control really deals with the topic of control quite well in such a way that even a spread call doesn't do that. So that's something I do, just a recommendation to look into crimping. And the last thing I'll say, so just very quickly to go through the list, you need to have some forces, a couple of switches, the ability to switch cards, some false mixes and false cuts, a couple of ways to do that. You should probably know how to remove a card in the open. I recommend a gambler's cop. And a couple of controls, a couple of ways to control a selected card or card of interest. And crimping, I recommend crimping is a really, really good way to deal with a lot of that stuff. The last thing that I would recommend is just know some discrepant moves. So things like the Bill Simon prophecy move, or like we talked about here, the crisscross force, right? Discrepant moves or moves where you're confusing the top for the bottom. Discrepant moves have a way of eliminating the need for sleights because they can be done in the open. And there's a lot of discrepant moves and a lot of discrepant kinds of methods that can get you some really big magic, really heavy effects without ever introducing any sleight of hand whatsoever. So I think those can be very powerful. And a lot of performers, a lot of grinding, working performers use discrepant moves. John Bannon has books and books and videos and videos and videos on that topic, where he's using a lot of things that are done right out in the open and really don't require a lot of sleight of hand. So I recommend that kind of as a sidebar suggestion that cuts the list down. It means that there's things on the list you may not even really have to deal with. And then the last thing I'll say, this isn't really on the list, but gaffs. I mean, you can do magic just using gaffs. You could just use gaffs all the time and have enough tricks to do a whole show and live on that. Nothing wrong with that. I don't think you should ever assume that good magicians don't use gaffs. I've seen a lot of really great magicians put out a lot of really great material, sometimes commercial, usually commercial, actually, usually in the public eye, Magic Castle acts that have been recorded that you can see, or TV acts, or even some social media stuff, where it looks like they're doing some kind of, amazing, top tier card control, and they're just using some kind of gaff, right? Gaffs are something you should entertain, particularly maybe a type of key card. You could get really good at using a breather crimp or any crimp. Again, any crimp. Double thick card is something I like a lot. Or a short card, corner short, end short, different kinds of short cards, or even like a stripper deck. Some people just do magic with a marked stripper deck, and you can do an enormous amount of stuff using gaffs like that and keys like that. So I highly recommend that you entertain that and practice with those gaffs. Don't assume that using something like a short card means that you can now just easily do a whole bunch of amazing things. You need to practice with the short card in video and with people to make sure that you're using that tool properly and you're using it in such a way that you're not tipping it off. You're not doing things that are obvious. And I think, see, what else do I have here? Now, the last question, products that are worth it. Products that are worth it. What kind of products are worth purchasing? So, I don't know how to answer this. I really don't. Because I do not want to recommend anything to you. I mean, I recommended my book for Stacked Deck and Memorized Magic Random, which I still recommend. But I don't want to recommend anything. I don't. Because whatever I recommend, you may not like. Or I may not be aware of something that you do like. The question, I think, really is, given everything that's available, not just in the public domain, but open source, and online social media on YouTube, is it really necessary to buy anything out there, particularly pertaining to learning sleights? I'll just say this. You should learn from people you want to learn from. If I am a jazz musician and I want to learn a particular jazz theory, if I'm a jazz pianist and I want to learn a particular kind of jazz theory for piano, I'll seek out the person that does that and I'll pay them whatever I have to learn it from them, right? If you find people on YouTube that are giving stuff out, just community, for free here like I do, and you find people that satisfy what you're looking for, well then no, you don't need anything else. I'm not going to lie to you. You really don't. Because again, you only need to learn the stuff that you need to do. You can make an entire living. I like to say that a professional magician, can do a full stage act, a full parlor act that is Magic Castle caliber, only ever having worked out illusions from Anneman's methods of forcing, right? You can get his forcing book, which is public domain, and that can be the only method you ever use, is just forcing numbers, cards, items. That's it. Just from that, you could derive an entire professional. You could render out hundreds of professional routines that would fill 40 minutes. Hundreds of these that would be Magic Castle caliber, and that's the only book you ever look at. That's a fact. So you need what you need to satisfy what you want. Okay. Now, if you're looking at magic, card magic, and particularly the known sleights and the magic that goes with that vocabulary, you probably should get the books that go with that. You should get Hugert and Browery and Erdnase and some of these classic books. And a lot of them, some of those books are in the public domain, and you can get the PDFs for free, legally for free, because they're out of date in terms of copyright. So with technology, that's something you can do. I like that. I have hard copies of these things just because I like to have hard copies of some things. But you probably should have those. I would recommend that if you're gonna get a video, you can look online and find people that are showing you that if the instruction's good. If it's convincing in the demonstration, the instruction's good. Just be discerning. If someone's saying, look at this new sleight, or this old sleight, whatever, and they show you on the camera and it looks awesome, and you practice it and you record yourself from different angles, and you realize, oh, this is very angle sensitive. And the person on the video is saying, this is not angle sensitive, you can do, but you're finding that that's not true. Well, then it isn't true. I mean, you can be discerning. Okay, so be discerning about what it is you're using and what you're going to choose to employ. Some things are angle sensitive, and you have to be mindful of that, and you got to do it. Something, as they say, don't work in the real world, and they work really well for social media. You know what that stuff's going to be. And you can hear someone tell you 100 times over that it works in the real world, but if it doesn't work in your real world, in the way that you like to perform and in your circumstances, well, then it doesn't, does it? Right? No one can tell you otherwise, because it's not your world that they're talking about. So just be discerning about things. But anyway, yeah, I think things are worth buying. I do. If it's what you want to learn, just be discerning about what you look up. But can you get by without buying anything ever and paying a cent? Can you get professional caliber stuff without ever buying a single thing? Yes. And one way you can actually do it is you can invent. You can just invent your own methods. You can take a deck of cards and you can think about the psychology of what you're trying to accomplish. What is it that the phenomenon of what people are experiencing? I want to get to this end, right? I want to get to Z. I'm starting at A, and I've got to go through my points to get down to that Z. What can I get away with? What do I have to do to get away with it? If I have to have a card removed from the deck and I have to do it secretly, what are ways that I could do that? Can I do it when there's a misdirect? Okay, can I invent a misdirect for that? Could I use an accomplice to do it? What can I invent? What methodology could I come up with to accomplish what I need to do? You can do that on your own, and you can invent your own methods that will fool the best magicians and never have to buy a single thing. You'll never have to pay for a single book or video or lesson. You can do that. There are some very, very sophisticated magicians who came up with repertoire that's just like that. Danny Day Ortiz did not come up with repertoire exclusively like that, but a lot of his best stuff is like that. Leonard Green, that kind of vein of card magicians that just looked at the deck of cards and thought, well, here's what I want to do. What logically do I have to do, and when would be the best time to do it in order to accomplish that in such a way that it is fooling, that people don't see it happening, and all the doors are shut, right? You can actually spend time investing in this and come up with a whole vocabulary of open moves that require no sleights or require sleights of your own making that, you'll probably be reinventing things. You can do that and come up with really good magic. I like to think about it like this. When it comes to sleights, I've seen a lot of magicians talk about how, well, this sleight really isn't new and inventive. They're really just copying this sleight over here. I like to think about this. You have a deck of cards. You have this side, you got that side, you got this side, you got this side, you got the top, you got the bottom, right? It's 6 sides. Things can go on and around any one of those sides. Every sleight is just that. How many cards are going to go around some direction and go back in the middle or underneath or over something? That's every sleight. That's every single sleight. Nobody actually invented the move that takes this card and puts it here. It just has to go there. Now all you have to think about is, what do I have to do so that it's not seen? How do I do that so it's undercover, right? What kind of move could I do to take this card and move it from here to there? Well, I can cover it. I can give it cover. I could give it cover here and then not have cover, and I could move it around to the bottom. I could, shift it in some way. I could get a break on it, and I could give it some cover, and then I could lift it up, and I could bring it down, and I could shift it, right? I can do it in such a way so it's not seen. I could maybe potentially just pick the card up, but I could pick the card up in such a way that it is not seen. If I turn over this way, now you can't see it from the coverage of my hand. So if I'm looking this way, it can be seen. And then if I turn this way, it can't be seen, and I can merely just move it to the other. I don't have to do a move. There are so many different ways to think about this and so many moves that have been invented to accomplish whatever it is you're trying to do. But in sleight of hand, that really is. I don't mean to reduce this to absurdity, but 6 sides, this is your real estate. You're moving something from one place to another. Do it so it can't be seen. That's pretty much it. Or do it in the open in such a way that it isn't noticed. And that's kind of the way I like to operate. So pick the sleights that you're comfortable with. I think that really is, which sleights are the best? They're the ones that you are comfortable doing, that you feel good about doing. They don't concern you. They don't bother you. You're not nervous about it. You're not waiting, okay, now I've got to do the move. You want to pick the moves that you can just do, right? You just do the move and the move is over. Those are the kind of moves that you want to pick and the ones that you want to put on your list. If the move makes you nervous, you have 2 options. You can practice it until it doesn't make you nervous and it becomes one of those things that you can just do, or just do a different move. Like I said, how many ways can you take a card from here and put it there, or take a card from here and put it there? Count them, the different ways that can be accomplished. Either through a move or through something that's done in the open. How can I take a card from here and get it on the bottom? Right? Well, I can just pick it up and put it on the bottom. In a time when I would be collecting cards, and I've accomplished it in the open. So there's a lot of different ways to accomplish any one thing. Pick the one that is so comfortable to you that you really don't have to think about it. It doesn't concern you. It doesn't make you nervous, and you can focus on the presentation and the communication, because that's what's far more important than anything else. So anyway, I hope I answered your question. These are my opinions. This is not like the gospel. There are going to be some other people out there. There's going to be some sleight of hand, expert that will say, you need to practice these sleights and you need to do them in a specific way, and they have to be done so that they can be seen from this angle and look exactly like, this video of Marlowe. And, fine, those people can have that opinion. I just don't find that to be true. I think the goal is that you want someone to believe something that has not actually happened. Any way you get to that end, by whatever method, if it can be done convincingly enough so that when you get to the end, not only do they believe that something happened that has not happened, but they can't see any other way that it could have happened other than the fact that it did, right? That it just happened. All the doors are shut. So that's the goal. and whatever fits that. The issue is not really what do you learn. I think the issue more is about what do you not bother with, because there's so much that you can choose from, and most of it is not really of any concern to most of us. So you got to find what works for you. Anyway, those are my thoughts on those questions. How to practice, what to practice. Are products worth it? Hopefully that kind of steers you. Maybe this is an unsatisfying answer, but I think it is. I think it's an honest answer. So best of luck with that. Happy magicking.